Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Hope you're all doing well. Um, we'll just start for this webinar. Normally, we'll just take just under 1 hour. As I said, if you have any questions or elements you'd like us to mention during the Q&A, you can reach through the Q&A tool, which you should have on the Zoom tool panel. But let's start with a brief intro about ourselves. So my name is Matthieu. I'm here with Jérémie.
Hello,
Uh,
everyone.
Hello, Jeremy. We've been working together for almost 16 years now. Initially, we as entrepreneurs, so we created one of the first French food tech startups. And then when we sold it, we created DigitalFoodLab, and as I said, spent 16 years in this French food tech and now European and global food tech ecosystem. What we'll do today is pretty simple. We'll review the findings of our latest report on the European food tech ecosystem. The report, as you may have already seen, has been published last month. It's publicly and freely available on our website. You can download it, share it as much as you want. And so to discuss those findings, and also we are today releasing our yearly top 50 of European startups, and we'll just discuss that afterwards. And obviously, take some time to answer your questions. So before starting with the findings, I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce what we do at Digital Food Lab. That's pretty simple. Our mission for the past 8 years has been and remains to basically making sense of what we observe in this agri-food tech ecosystem. What does that mean? It means that a lot of things are happening. Most of them are not super relevant. Some of these insights are highly relevant, and our job is to transform all this noise first into a clear picture. That's what we try to do with our trend curve, as you have on the screen, or our mission with our clients. And then out of these pictures is to find the right strategies and how to act on them. And we do that with our clients, obviously with the newsletters that we publish, and with many events we attend as speakers. What we do on a daily basis is, as a business, to work with large agri-food companies all over the food supply chain, from upstream players to downstream, to retail, to ingredient and CPG food manufacturers. And we worked on exploration missions on helping clients to understand what's happening through workshops, through deep dives, through our dedicated food watch offer, and with scouting and mapping missions. We look at it, and even if we are nowadays and today speaking very much about the European food tech ecosystem, we are doing it with a global approach, trying to look at startups, research, and what other large agri-food companies are doing, and as I said, all along the food supply chain. So that was us. Now let's jump to the report and the findings of the report. As I said, publicly available, and you can have a look at it if you want more details. The idea today is a bit more to share our impressions, our conclusions and takeaways from this report. A quick reminder, probably quite obvious for most of you, but it's always interesting to have a reminder of what we're talking about when we say food tech or agri-food tech. For us, it's basically the innovation ecosystem, or the ecosystem made of all the players innovating all along the food supply chain. So the two extremes would be, on one hand, animal feed, so new solutions for feeding animals on the farm, agricultural technologies, and on the other hand, new ingredients developed for health, notably the healthy aging topic. So that's everything that we look at, from ag, ingredients, food connected to health, delivery, supply chain, food service applications. So that's food tech. Why also looking at this ecosystem, not just for the sake of it, even if it's interesting, it's just because we are observing that these startups are reshaping the way food is being made, and also because the food needs some change, notably around 5 drivers of change, which are climate related, quite obvious for everyone, an aging population, more and more obvious, health related constraints, both on the end of consumers that are looking for more health-oriented solutions, and also from the societal point of view, where we see that our food system is making a lot of people unhealthy, value distribution, a big challenge for food companies, and geopolitics. I think it doesn't need a lot of more comments on that due to the current situation. So that's our landscape. And then if we go directly to the findings of the report, that they could be summarized in this single graph. Here is a vision of the past decade in the European food tech ecosystem. Pretty much 3 phases. A first one before 2020, slow rise, an ecosystem, and we'll see that that was not very relevant globally. Then peak of excitement, similar to what happened elsewhere in the world. Huge investments coming for food companies, ag tech, delivery, etc. And then post 2022, inflation crisis, diminution of funding, which keeps getting worse, notably nowadays, where investors are slightly more interested in AI-related topics than food ones. So where we are, basically, funding in Europe is about 3 billion for 2025, which is comparable to 2019, 2020. So it's almost like if all these 4 years of increase and then decrease had been erased, and we got back. But we'll see that the picture is slightly more complicated than that. First, one element which is very interesting is that if we compare Europe funding for agri-food tech to the global agri-food tech funding, which you have on the screen, we see pretty much the same pattern: slow rise, explosion, and then decrease. But what is here super interesting is the share of funding going to Europe startups. Before peak of excitement, it was quite small, around 10 to 15%, and then it increased as the rest of the world was decreasing, let's say, faster than in Europe. So in a nutshell, what we're often saying is we have a bigger share of a smaller pie, and we'll see in terms of categories that is especially the case in some very key categories. If we look at the distribution of funding in terms of maturity of startups, so oftentimes a startup starts by raising a seed around 500 to 1 million euros, and then a series A when there is some kind of validation, technical or commercial. There is B, C, and D, and more when there is some kind of traction, notably commercial or B2B traction. And what we see is quite encouraging, and it's quite the opposite compared to what we observe globally, is that seed and series A are preserved in Europe compared to later stage. So it means that early stage funding, companies just being created with new R&D, new research, etc., are still getting funded in Europe, which is very, very positive. It's still the case that in Europe we have a hard time to fund late stage expansion startups, but at least the future new startups are getting preserved. And again, it's totally the opposite on the global scale. So very interesting, showing that in many ways the future of some key food technologies is being developed in Europe. If we go down a level and try to see how this translates in terms of key deals, so the startups that have raised the most funding over the past year. Here are the top 10 deals. So without commenting the 10 startups, what is first striking for us compared to previous reports is that if you were looking at the same top 10 deals 3-4 years ago, it would have been 8 or 9 out of the 10 deals, which would have been delivery deals. Here, there is just one, which is a pure delivery startup, which is Picnic, a grocery delivery startup in the Netherlands, and others are doing different things, oftentimes related to technology. So that's number one. Then number two is obviously the presence of two aquaculture startups. Even so that's super interesting. It's super specific to Europe, where we have a number of startups doing inland aquaculture compared to at sea aquaculture, which is much more common. So interesting to see that this space is doing quite well, especially in Nordics countries. Then if we change our lens from maturity top deals to geographies, what we see here is that we have a slight change in terms of major ecosystem compared to previous years. Still same countries, mostly, which are Netherlands, France, UK. But what is changing is first the absence of Germany. The ecosystem and agri-food ecosystem in Germany is doing very poorly over the past 3-4 years, with the absence of some major deals in delivery. The ecosystem is not doing super well, so that's interesting. And on the other side, it's also the expansion, even if it's relative, of the Spanish ecosystem, which was not, let's say, on the top list of or the top radar of many investors and open innovation teams. Nowadays, looking at what's happening in Spain is quite interesting. So we see some evolutions, and in that case, comparison Spain versus Germany, it's quite interesting also to read it with some analysis of what's happening in terms of public funding, public investments, grants through infrastructure, etc. Whereas Spanish local communities, Spanish government is much more active than what's happening in Germany. So quite interesting to also have this reading. Then again, let's change the way we look at it, and let's have a look at where the money is going, and that's where I think it's most interesting. As I said, if we erase 21 to 24 and just compare to pre-COVID, pre-excitement, the 3 billion versus 3.1, 3.3 in 2019, 2020, we see that the distribution of funding is very different. Pre-COVID, money was going very much towards delivery. It was quick commerce. Most of the startups have disappeared. The gorillas and other kind of players, restaurant delivery players, and some kind of grocery delivery. Nowadays, funding is much more oriented towards food science. So either new brands, D2C brands, or alternative proteins and ingredients, and agriculture, which has always been a strong ecosystem in Europe. There is also an evolution in food service. Pre-COVID, we had a lot of money going towards payment solutions, services, or solutions for restaurants. Nowadays, this ecosystem has almost vanished in Europe. It's not totally over, but it's much less present. So strong evolution, and an ecosystem that is much more B2B oriented, much more tech-driven than it was 5-6 years ago. And what we'll do is enter in more details in the two most exciting categories, I would say, which are AgTech and food science. When we talk about AgTech, it's all the technologies and trends that are reshaping how we produce raw ingredients, food products. So we have 6 subcategories, and we see that there has been a strong evolution in these categories. Whereas a few years ago, companies in animal feed were mostly doing insects, and they are raising much less funds. So this category is doing much less positively. Urban farming as a novel farm has evolved. We are talking much less about indoor farming and much more about aquaculture nowadays. But we see this evolution, which is very interesting in this ecosystem, and which is remaining one of the 2 or 3 pillars of the ecosystem in Europe. What we've tried then is to apply our oftentimes used trend curve framework. Here on the screen, what you have are represented with different types of dots, all the trends that we observe globally in agriculture. And then we have mapped where is the European ecosystem standing. Is it absent? Just a follower with few startups and much less present than other startups globally? Or is it a leader with some or most of the global leaders? What we can see is that European startups in agriculture are present in all the trends and are becoming leaders in many, many areas. Still in insect farming, even if this trend is at the bottom, let's say, of the trend curve. So we may have questions on the future of any individual company there, but still leading there, leading in regenerative agriculture, in bio inputs, so all the alternative inputs for agriculture, and it's present even on areas which are, let's say, complicated in Europe, like genomics with future crops. So very interesting to see this ecosystem quite active. And then I wanted to conclude this part on agriculture to underline 3 signals that we observed over the past year, which we think are elements that are super relevant for any person interested in agri-food tech, and especially here in AgTech to follow. First, beyond the noise, insect farming is not dead. As shown in this curve, this evolution is normal. After such a peak of excitement, it's normal to have a return to reality and to some kind of commercial discovery, and that for many companies just to disappear. That's part of venture, that's part of the startup nature ecosystem. So it's not dead. We see new players emerging, new applications emerging. So let's wait 12, 18 months to deliver a final judgment on the potential of this technology. Then other part which is interesting is that regen agriculture deals are rising. So deals for where large CPG or ingredients companies are doing deals with farmers directly or indirectly to support regen practices. What we observe is that it's interesting, but it's getting done outside of the startup ecosystem. So you have on one hand tens of startups doing regen agriculture practices, carbon credits, things, and big companies, but doing the deals directly by themselves. So there is a good question on the potential future of these companies. And finally, one of the areas we are actively looking at right now, still wondering if it's a good or a bad thing, but we see many startups in agriculture benefiting, but also moving towards defense, notably in satellite imagery and in some other areas, notably robotics, where we still don't know if it's moving away or if it's extending in defense. So that will need to be seen. It's a good sign in some ways because it's additional funding, it's a new application. But for agriculture, it may also just mean that startups are leaving the field because it's too complicated, in Europe at least, to do business, and they are moving toward defense, where there is a stronger pool for innovation. If you move away from agriculture and look at the second pillar for innovation, which would be food science, here we have two broad categories. One, which is innovation, market innovation in products, which can be pet food, CPG brands, drinks and beverage on one hand, and on the other hand, you have the broad alternative proteins and functional ingredient ecosystem. The ecosystem is doing quite well, even if funding is declining, but we often say that it's doing quite well because it's actually decreasing much less than in the rest of the world, notably for alternative proteins. Now, and we'll see the graph later on, Europe is leading in alt proteins, so that's very positive, even if it's leading from a low standpoint. So there is appetite for innovation in Europe. And from the other point, which is about brands, we are quite happy to see that European brands are finally doing well, are rising, are getting acquired. So things happening in Europe around brands. If we look at same alt protein trend curve pattern, here I think the trend curve is self-explanatory. Europe is now leading in most technologies. It is absent in two areas where basically it's for regulatory reasons. You can have molecular farming, which is about genetic modification, GMOs, and so it's not possible even to test the tech in Europe, or let's say it's not really possible. So startups are elsewhere, but for all the key technologies, cellular agriculture, biomass fermentation, precision fermentation, plant cell culture, protein discovery, Europe is leading with some, and in some cases, even all the key startups of this ecosystem. That's quite a radical change compared to 3-4 years ago, where Europe was a total laggard in terms of alt proteins, new ingredients, innovation. All the startups we were talking about were based in Singapore, Israel, and the US. And nowadays, in precision fermentation, everybody's talking about European startups. So that's very, very interesting. Such a change. So maybe we can have a discussion about that in Q&A, but I feel that a lot of things have been done and that Europe has progressed so much. There is a lot of work to be done, but in Europe, many good things have happened, and we can be happy about it. And also, it is reflected in the fact that so many investments in European startups are coming from foreign investment funds and big food companies, which have also spotted that things are now happening in Europe. Again, three signals which I think are important to follow for the year ahead. First, around precision fermentation, Europe has taken the lead in technologies, in startups, in applications, and that's the key point, and I think we'll come back again and again on it, it's not for commercialization, nor for industrialization. Industrialization is happening in the US, in Australia, in the Gulf countries, not in Europe. Commercialization, everybody is talking about the US. So we still have some challenges to solve in Europe, but at least we've become attractive technically, technologically. Then, that's my central point, I think the example around cocoa alternatives is very fascinating because a few years ago, nobody talked about cocoa alternatives, or not seriously. The crisis of the price around cocoa has made many companies aware of the need to create resilience. Many companies have invested, some startups have been created, and now among the different technologies being developed, many of them are led by European startups. And finally, plant-based products, even if the talk is that these products are not doing well, some of the companies that are doing well are based in Europe, and that's very interesting to follow because they are also giving ideas about what to do and how to lead in this ecosystem. And to conclude on food science, I just wanted to have a note on brands. As I often say, it's one of the spaces that we like the most and that European don't like so much. But brands are startups as well as precision fermentation companies are doing innovation. Finally, there is a catch-up in terms of innovation, in terms of funding, and in terms of exits. And I think the best example was the recent acquisition of Fuel by Danone and the previous acquisition of YFood by Nestle, showing that companies can create real traction in Europe in multiple markets and then getting acquired by giant international companies. So things are going well, and we expect an increased M&A activity in Europe for 100 million plus revenue startup brands, but also at a lower level, we see maybe 10, 20 million revenue startups that are ready to get acquired. And we hope that, and we expect to see more acquisition in that middle range in the next 1 or 2, 3 years now. So in a nutshell, what would be our takeaways from this report? First, a strong note of optimism. A lot of progress has been made over the past decade in Europe. And it's not a story of having more money, as we've seen. We currently have less money than we had last year or the year before, but we have a story of an ecosystem that has taken the lead in some of the most important technologies. As you have on the screen, the graph of the distribution of alternative protein funding in 2025. And it's not just in plant-based, but it's in all key technologies that Europe is leading. And that's for the second year in a row. So that's very positive. So things have changed. Research has finally exited labs. Some universities have created mechanisms like VTT in Finland, VIB in Belgium, D2C in Denmark, which have created these mechanisms, these research centers that are connected to startup creation. So that's very positive. And obviously, I've just named examples in some European countries, and in other things could be again improved to go further. Then second positive news is not just research exiting the labs and going into startups. It's also something that is well known globally, and funding for startups. Partnerships are coming from large agri-food companies, not just from Europe, but globally. So we've seen companies from Japan, like Kubota, investing in agricultural robots in Norway, or Ajinomoto investing in France, standing ovation, but also ingredient, large ingredient manufacturer from the US investing in a Swiss startup. So things are moving forward. And again, let's compare to the situation 5 years ago. It was about European large agri-food companies investing in Israeli and US startups. So things have radically changed. So that's very, very interesting. But then it's not the end of the way. Europe has some blockers. First, industrialization is happening elsewhere. So it's good and well to fund technology. It's good and well to have the best techs. But if the industrialization is happening in the Gulf region, in China, in the US, that's not, let's say, what these techs have been funded for. There is the regulatory problem for precision fermentation for many ag technologies. The path is still creation in Europe, find a corporate partner, and commercialize in the USA. That's not ideal at the end of the day. And for brands, there is still this problem of a very complex and fragmented market in Europe, both from a financial point of view and from a consumer point of view. So that's pretty much where we are in Europe. Say, at the end of the day, which is strange in some ways, even if the funding is declining, we have a very optimistic take of our read of what's happening in the ecosystem. For the second part, what I wanted to share with you is our updated top 50 of the European most attractive, most interesting European startups. It's something that we publish each year. We'll release it publicly next week in our newsletter. But I wanted to take the opportunity to comment on it and also to see the evolutions over this past year, but also over the past 5-6 years that we've been doing this top 50. So what we do is pretty simple. We have a look at all the 3,000 plus agri-food tech startups in Europe that are still active, and we try to match them with answers to the following question. Is the startup related to one of the key trends that we observe globally and in Europe? Has it enough funding to go to the next stage, either through investment or profitability? Is there some kind of hype? So is there an appetite from corporates or from consumers for its products or research? And do we see a significant exit potential? So we have removed from last year some companies that are doing quite well in terms of revenue, but which are slightly transforming themselves in SMEs, which is very positive, but not something that we consider as huge exit potential. So without further delay, here is our Europe FoodTech 50 for 2026. So with the 50 startups that we think are the most exciting, most interesting to know from a point of view of either an investor, from a corporate point of view, trying to look at what's happening in Europe, what is in a snapshot, what's good and well in agri-food innovation in Europe. So here is pretty much the mapping. Without commenting on the 50 startups, we'll have a view on 5-6 of the most interesting ones. Compared to last year, 3 notes, 1 exit, very successful. Very interesting to see that startups are getting acquired at such a high valuation, $1.2 billion. No failure in 1 year, which is kind of good because in the current context, among 50 agri-food startups, you can very well have some failures. So also showing that we're not too bad at selecting startups. Not less so positive. Actually, when we did this mapping, one of our surprises is that the reshuffle is not so big, just because the ecosystem is not moving so much. There is still activity, but much less than 3-4 years ago. So the apparition of exciting players is not so strong than it was a few years ago. And if we do the same job compared to 3 years ago, here obviously the evolution is much stronger. And 3 notes again. I think the most striking one is the expansion of food science. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, food science was a much smaller space in Europe. Now it has become bigger. Same for agriculture. And in the reverse, delivery is shrinking because much less startups are getting exciting in space. And same for food service, supply chain. So interesting to see that. And finally, I wanted to highlight few startups from the mapping, not because we think that they are the most interesting or the best one, but just because I think each of the 6 startups have a story to tell that is easy to convey maybe in this webinar format. But I would love to have the opportunity to comment on the each of the 50 startups, but they're not really ideal for webinar format. So the first one, it's a startup named Catkin from the UK, which is very simply doing pet food for cats. Pretty straightforward story. 6 years ago, getting funded, 70 million raised, revenue which is doubling almost every year. Should have been the same thing last year. Product is high quality frozen human grade meat. Why we selected it? Because it's in many ways very obvious and interesting to see that these obvious stories are succeeding. It's replicating the template of Butternut Box. Similarly, a British startup which did pretty much the same thing, but for dog food. And it's doing the same, but for cat food in the UK, high quality, quite premium, and could achieve the same success. Butternut Box was sold 2 years ago for 500 million to a private equity firm. So interesting, and also because it's showing that Europeans can create brands successfully and at quite high levels. The only limitation is that, as in many cases for European brands, it's one market only and not really successful in expanding in new markets. Second startup, Starship Technologies, quite old, 12 years of age, created in Estonia with offices all over Europe and the US, almost 300 million raised, so creating sidewalk robots for delivery. Why is it interesting? First, because there is a robot moment right now due to AI, etc. But robotic delivery is starting to work, and more people are commenting on it. And because it's also showing that things are changing in Europe. This startup was created in Europe. It moved to the US for experimentation, notably on US campuses. And nowadays, it's coming back to Europe. Europe, US, Europe. And that's just an element, but showing that things now can happen in Europe, and more and more of these robots are getting deployed in Central Europe, notably. Third example, Zoe, British startups doing personalized nutrition. So it's selling a test kit and a subscription plan for helping consumers find what they need to eat based on their target, mostly weight loss. Why is it interesting? First, because it's probably the only startups globally doing well with personalized nutrition, so that's interesting. It's maybe the only one with real science behind it, and also because it's really well aligned with the current healthy aging GLP-1 trends. Fourth example, No Fence, Norwegian startups, which is replacing traditional fences, hardwired fences, with GPS collars, which are put on around cows and other animals, which with audio and some electric shocks create fences or virtual fences for livestock. Very interesting because it's a long story, 15 years now, but it's showing that this kind of pragmatic, not super showy innovation. First, it takes time. I like to illustrate these stories and how long it can take to make the technology work. And also, it's a counterexample to many things that I said around expansion only in the US. In that case, the startup is expanding in European countries, so showing that in some cases, European tech can also expand in some European markets. Fifth example, Planted, which is a Swiss startup doing plant-based meat. Funded 7 years ago, more than 100 million raised. Why is it interesting compared to other plant-based brands? What we like is the integration, which is quite rare in this ecosystem, from R&D internal, so real R&D and not just recipe development. R&D, industrialization, internal capabilities, and internal marketing and brand. So few players have these three elements, and we find it very interesting. And the other point is that the brand has shown that it's possible to sell high quality products, tasty products at a premium in the plant-based ecosystem, which was not very intuitive. And finally, well aligned with the, again, GLP-1 and healthy aging trends is Back to Life from Denmark, which is leveraging precision fermentation to create what is called binding proteins. So the idea is simple. These binding proteins bind to metabolites in the gut, and they prevent these negative, harmful metabolites to cross in the intestinal barrier, and so they reduce, at the end of the day, infections and the need for antibiotics. So very well aligned with the gut health trend, with the antimicrobial resistance trend. So super interesting in these angles, and very good example of European research getting out of the lab, startup getting created, and also, because that's the case nowadays, of an application that will be a supplement in the US. So also of the challenges of the European ecosystem to commercialize locally. So that's about it for these top 50 of European startups. We'll, as I said, release it next week. So I hope you'll find it interesting. And obviously, if you have any questions or comments on it, I'd love to know about them. To conclude, before taking your question, which you can ask on the Q&A tool, if you're interested to have a presentation, live presentation or webinar, we do a lot of them to explain what's happening in food tech, in ag tech, to inspire teams, R&D, marketing teams, whole teams, or top management through dedicated workshops. So we have a whole set of formats. So let's have a talk if that's something relevant for you. And as I said, otherwise, our mission is pretty simple. It's to decode, to make sense of what's happening in innovation, medium and long-term innovation, and to transform that into actionable strategies for agri-food companies, either through ad hoc missions or on the long term with our FoodTech Watch offer. And yeah, thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, please reach out.
Thank you, Matthieu. Thank you very much for this quick presentation. So yes, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. So I have some question from the audience. You said European funds don't like so much brands. Yeah, it's true. And I have questions in this direction about the difference in we see globally that money tends to go to brands, and it's not the case in Europe, which prefers B2B companies. So can you explain why in Europe we, or at least funds, prefer financing B2B companies?
Yeah, pretty simply, I'd say for at least 2 or 3 reasons. First one, the most obvious one, there are few acquisition stories. So if you're an investor, you oftentimes look at the past and you say, yeah, if there are no brands getting acquired, I will not invest into a brand. So that's number one. That is changing, but slowly. And why are there so few acquisitions? Is that it's mostly because brands in Europe have a very hard time to scale out of their home country. And so they remain at a small scale. And nobody will acquire a company that is doing 5 million in revenue. Maybe not nobody, but it won't be a top story. So to get exciting for big acquisition, you need to reach 20 and at least and ideally 100 million in revenue, and that requires a presence in multiple countries. So that's why we have this complexity. So that is changing, but still retailers and then consumers are very different from one market to the other.
Oh, thank you. About the lead in alternative proteins, do you think it will last in the next decade, or at least in the next few years, or do you think is this a cyclical trend?
Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
difficult. Yeah.
it's difficult because, to be honest, I wouldn't have predicted that Europe would be in the lead in alternative proteins 3 or 4 years ago because it the current situation is due to the context, to inflation, to the reduction of investments in the US, etc., and the fact that the startups in Europe were leaner and less exposed to a cash crunch that appeared in other areas. But for European startups to build on what is happening and for the ecosystem to build on it, what we need is a scale-up strategy. And we need an answer to the question, who will build the 100 million plus factories and many factories that are required for these companies? Where will it happen? If it happens only in China, in the Gulf countries, and in the US, then the answer will be that the value will get displaced elsewhere, and at the end of the day, new startups will be created elsewhere.
Thank you. And to come back to the brands topic, why do European brands rarely make it to the US?
Because going to the US, I think first there is one idea in Europe that going to the US is a bit like going to another European market, but the US are at the name 50 states, and there are different retailers in different states. Number one, number two, everything is more expensive in states, and that's often a misunderstood problem. Notably, advertising and online advertising is much more expensive, and that number two and number three, oftentimes is brands go to the US too soon. And they are not strong enough in Europe, and the founders go to the US, and then the European, let's say, a part is collapsing, whereas the US part is not doing well enough. So some brands are doing well. One which we are not putting in our European top 50, which is Waterdrop, is kind of having a success there. So it's possible, but you have to be very strong in Europe and to have very strong financial backing to do it.
Yeah, thank you. For about funding, yeah. Globally and also in Europe, are we today seeing a temporary correction or a permanent reset of food tech funding? And if it's just temporary, will we ever see another hype and investment boom like in 2021?
Again, it depends on two elements. What we put in funding. Do we count grants? Do we count debt? Because notably, if there are funds going towards industrialization, it could be very well in different schemes and not just investment. So that's number one. And then, yeah, we expect to see an increase of investments, notably because as many of the ingredients, many of the technologies, notably around agriculture, around food science, but also packaging, are maturing, we will have the first proof of concept, like cocoa products in the US at the end of the year, some precision fermentation ingredients for health benefits later this year or early next year. Maybe, and we hope it will be the case, this will create a new wave of appetite and then an increase of funding, which will go to new ingredients on one hand, and hopefully through new mechanisms, through industrialization.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And maybe the last question for today, um, for you, what is the most exciting trend or technology to look at globally? And in Europe, will it be the same?
Yeah, let's say right now, the one that everybody's talking about at some point it's getting exciting. It's around precision fermentation because we have so many points converging. Like uh, earlier today, we released a newsletter with a graph with the price of whey protein, beta-lactoglobulin, showing that it's increasing so fast because everybody wants protein in pretty much every type of product. So finally, there could be an application. We see that sugar alternatives developed through precision fermentation are finally coming to the market. So we are, and that's very exciting, on, let's say, on the verge of having finally this product reaching the consumer through product applications. So we are very excited to see that, and we expect it, obviously, to create an appeal for new entrepreneurs, new ingredients, new applications.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, very exciting. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. We will share it on YouTube. And I remind you that this presentation, majority of the slides of the presentation are extracted from the report, which is available for free on our website. So if it's not already the case, do not hesitate to download it. And yeah, thank you, Matthew, thank you
Thanks.
everyone, and have a good day.
See
Bye.
you.
See
Bye.
you.